Thanks, Angela, and I love that music. It kind of dates me, though. It was something Jimi Hendrix and my birthday were around the same time. So, I'll try to answer Angela's challenge, I guess, of getting rid of parking meters. But I think as we look to the future, one of the things I wanted to do is talk a little bit about the past, because I think certainly the past in terms of Visa was defined by inflection points, and I think as we sit here today, we're at a major inflection point. I mean, certainly when I look at the size of this audience gathered here in Copenhagen, the Money 2020 franchise, right, as we actually approach 2020, it's just shocking to see payments at the center of and seeing a group this size gathering around payments. And so I thought before we talk about the future a little bit, I'd just talk a little bit about the past, because I actually think the past in this instance provides a lot of insight into the future. So for Visa, when we think about innovation and inflection points, it's in our DNA, right? I imagine to say most of you that traveled here used a general purpose card of some sort, right? And I think we don't really think about the magic that piece of plastic has provided us, because we can all now travel. I used to have to travel, get currency before I came to a country, and now I get on a plane like I do several times a year and travel the world with a passport and a general purpose card. And it all started here in 1958 with what I would argue is one of the first agile bank tests. And so for those of you that don't know the story, Bank of America dropped 60,000 pieces of mail into Fresno, California to test this concept, right? There was no proven track record. And they dropped this 60,000 pieces of mail to test what was a general purpose card. And I love these really old marketing materials, because again, when you think about what you'll hear a lot about at this conference, digital identity, and they'll know who you are when you see your Bank of America card, right? The same things we look at today in terms of identity, those challenges were kind of brought to the fore in 1958, right? So big inflection point, the general purpose card is born, Fresno, California. Flash forward to the next major inflection point. And again, in today's day and age, it's just really incredible when you think about national nets, when you think about some of our largest clients wanted to kind of close the loop. Bank of America did something really incredible. They opened the network, right? So there was no such thing as an open network. Remember, at that time, Bank of America was a closed loop, acquired merchants and issued cards on the same network. And in 1966, they decided to license. And actually, back to the Jimi Hendrix reference, this is actually a real ad from 1969. And in the copy, they talk about in 1969, Bank of America card was now available in 48 states and the District of Columbia, South Africa, the United Kingdom, Japan, and Canada, right? But the opening of the network, which gets us to where we are today as Visa, at that time, they went from 2 million cards on the B of A network in 1966 to this point in time, 40 million cards in the span of a couple of years because of licensing, right? And so the network effect was created. And then the next major inflection point came just because of luck, which a lot of times is the case in innovation. And some guy named Thomas Watson Jr. convinced Thomas Watson Sr. that vacuum tubes are kind of interesting. And the age of the modern computer was born. And so VisaNet, which was our version of what I would argue was the first platform of service, was developed. It was the authorization system, moving from paper to electronic. But even in this, right, there's innovation. So for those that don't know, what is now called VisaNet was originally called, the authorization system was called Base 1. And some of you may know what that stands for, but it was Bank of America Systems Experiment, right? So even then, the authorization systems, the cloud systems, were experiments, right? And so today that gets us to where we are with VisaNet. And then the next major inflection point hits. And something that I think when we look back on, it feels like it's been with us for a long time now. But late 90s, the birth of the World Wide Web, right, connecting all of us via TCP/IP, and it felt like the world was really connected. And for Visa, in a lot of cases, again, we got lucky because, like the last guest from Amazon, companies like Web 1.0 companies like Amazon and eBay were created, and commerce went from a Monday to Friday 9 to 5 opportunity to a 24/7 opportunity. And again, it felt like we were in the middle of that just because, again, we had a system that worked for mail order and telephone order, and effectively we all became data entry clerks, right? So we saved LL Bean and Sears a lot of money because we were now doing the data entry, but it felt like commerce was special. But from Visa's perspective, there was a real limitation, and we don't really think about it, but even though the world was connected, in order to get online and make a transaction in a face-to-face environment or even an e-commerce environment, required a wired line telephone cable and good electricity, right? Because remember, e-commerce back then, you had a big PC on your desktop. So while we were connected and we were driving a lot of commerce, our franchise really looked like this, right? Where you see lights on that map. Because you needed that good electricity and wired line telephone. And so when you see this map, it reminds me that there's a lot of commerce happening that we would never be able to get at, right? To go into markets like in sub-Saharan Africa, we'd have to wait for copper wire to be pulled. And so what happened next, right? And we're about to celebrate the 10th anniversary of the iPhone later this week. The mobile internet occurs. And all of a sudden now the world is plumbed for not only commerce and telecommunications, but literally every corner of the world now lights up. And so effectively our franchise now goes like this because people are connected 24/7. And so our franchise grew quite a bit, and we were now connected to the world writ large. And so we're now upon the next inflection point, right? And so all you got to do is go to the Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas to see where the future's headed, right? LG with its new flexible screen that effectively hangs on your wall with magnets. And we see this obviously in mobile handsets. Robotics, changing not only retail environments, but obviously all sorts of automation. Connected cars. We're working with 14 auto manufacturers to begin to connect the car to the web and start to think about how commerce occurs in all these spaces. Robotics of all sorts, AI, virtual reality. I mean, so commerce is changing around us, and all we've got to do is plug into it. And certainly when you think about the IoT space writ large, click, there we go. Pick a number, 18, 20, 50 billion devices, all of which are connected, and the vast majority of which will want to do commerce. It's a scale at which we've never seen. And again, for us at Visa, certainly, we reach this point in time where we have 3 billion cards. We've got 40 million merchants connected to our network. And yet when you think about just the scale that the IoT space is going to bring to us, we have to rethink our business as this is the next major inflection point. So what are we doing? So the first piece was the connection point, right? The connectivity. And so as I mentioned before, we've connected VisaNet up because we are a cloud as service. So our cloud touches the ground as the mobile internet and these devices come online. We already have that. But in a world where we're dealing with software developers in every corner of the globe, that's not good enough. It's not just connectivity, but it's really rethinking the way we expose our systems and services, right? The customers we service today, whether it's our financial institutions, which are in 200 plus markets, around the world, all have different competitive pressures and needs. They all want to compete against each other. They've got different services they need to provide to their customers, and so we've had to decompose the network into a set of APIs that allow them to take advantage of them on their own basis. And so we've now done that. We've introduced the Visa Developer Platform. We have sets of APIs, but again, today, the real focus is on our current financial institutions, as I mentioned. So working with the largest FIs in the world and our largest merchants, we're trying to help them solve problems we never could solve before. Because when you had an analog piece of plastic, it was very difficult to do things differentially. So we've broken this down into a set of APIs to make it easy for them to combine. But more importantly, now we can mash up those APIs with their APIs, and we're working with some of the world's largest and most innovative technology companies. Because increasingly, right, our consumers want to be digital first, mobile first, and these are the folks that are creating the operating systems, the devices, the experiences that are changing the world. And so working with the combination of our clients and the third parties, we're now addressing kind of 4 major new use cases, right? Clearly, the digitization of the physical point of sale. And even that you can define in multiple ways. Certainly there's the pays, Apple Pay, Samsung Pay, Android Pay, Microsoft's wallet. Increasingly with the Amazon Go experience, right? The cloud at the point of sale. So as an example, we've actually created a shopping cart that when you put goods into it, we can actually, with RFID tags, turn the shopping cart into literally the point of sale tied to your mobile phone. So the cloud, the pays, it's all changing. In emerging markets, right, where I mentioned before, no need for wireline telephone and electricity. The mobile experience is completely changing commerce, and we're seeing this in India with demonetization, where a merchant can now use a QR code and a consumer can scan it and push funds, which gets me to the next major use case, which is reversing the payment flow. So in a world, and I know at this conference, a lot of discussion about faster payments, but I don't think people realize, and we certainly haven't talked about it, but Visa's been a fast funds kind of push payment mechanism since the time of the refund. Right? So anytime you took a good back, the merchant pushed the money back to your account. Well, now we have over 1 billion debit and prepaid cards that are fast funds enabled, meaning that I can push money, good funds to your account and have it ready to spend immediately. And what's really most interesting about it is most people think about that in the P2P use case sense, but really what's been great about by exposing this API, what we're seeing is a whole new economy of use cases appear. So think about the gig economy, whether you're a Lyft driver, an Uber driver, an Airbnb host. You can now request your funds in real time and have good funds in your account ready to spend that day, right then. And so we have a billion of those cards enabled today, another 700 million coming online over the next 12 to 18 months, right? So just rethinking the network. And by the way, we didn't think about that. We've been sitting on this capability for 20, 30 plus years. And it really took innovators really looking at the network differently to help us really see the vision for this. And then you think about accelerating e-commerce. Well, I'll be the first to say we at Visa, and I'd say the group at large and the ecosystem has done a disservice to consumers and merchants because we've competed the wrong way when you think about an e-commerce transaction. If you think about the physical point of sale, I mentioned that kind of the magical experience you have when you travel the world these days. You can pull a card out, tap it, dip it, swipe it, and it works. And it works not just because there's an ISO 85, 83 message or an EMV message, but it works because consumers and merchants aren't confused. And yet, if you think about the physical point of sale, the e-commerce point of sale, what have we done? We've created this NASCAR-like effect of stickers and logos where we've all got to seek out like the match between whatever my user ID is and whatever acceptance device is there. And so it's created confusion. And what we see happens with confusion is merchants don't know what to invest in, so they don't invest, and consumers don't know what to use. And yet we're all trying to solve the same problem, which is take friction out of e-commerce. And so what we're working on now is a set of standards to actually make it more like the physical point of sale and cooperating with the ecosystem and make it a better transaction. And then last but not least is next-gen commerce. I mean, clearly in the IoT space, in order to scale, number one, you can't put a card inside of a ring. You can't put a card inside of a fridge, or at least I haven't seen a Samsung device. They may be working on it where you can slide a card in it. But the fact is, tokens are really important because it's the next way for us to distribute account capabilities to all these devices. But Visa can't go it alone. It has to take an ecosystem play. And so we're creating standards there. And more importantly, we're working with the networks, the other networks, but also the third parties like Gemalto, like G&D, to help us get distribution. Because when you're talking about 20 billion devices, it's impossible for us to connect to all those. And again, what we're about is trying to make it easy for consumers and merchants to connect and transactions to occur. Right? And so to make those use cases work, we take our APIs, we're taking our clients' APIs, and we're working with, like I said, some of the most innovative companies to do that. And what I'd like to do with the remainder of my time is introduce the latest partner, which again, I think may be a surprise to some folks. But we've just announced an equity investment in Klarna. And again, I think, and I'll bring up here in a second my partner from Klarna, but I think historically most people would have thought us as competitors. But again, I think more and more we think about how we can empower the ecosystem to solve those merchant and consumer friction points. So with that, let me introduce Michael Rouse, the Chief Commercial Officer of Klarna, to take a couple questions. Michael?
Thanks, Jim.
You're welcome. So, Michael, as I was saying in the introduction, I think historically most people would have thought of Klarna and Visa as competing for the same customer and the same use case and same space. So, if you wouldn't mind, I'd love to hear, and I'm sure they would, like how you think about the relationship and why you partnered with Visa.
Yeah, thank you. It's very exciting. I suppose when we first started this dialogue, we started it from a point of friction. But I think, as we look at how we are scaling our company and our growth ambitions, and obviously with the announcement of our banking license last week as well, we realize as we think about growth, there's so much more potential for us to do this together and work and look at the synergies and the collaboration elements that can fuel that growth. Because, at the end of the day, per your presentation, we're both trying to solve the same things. But we both come at it with a set of capabilities and a set of use cases that ultimately bringing those together is going to far better serve the end customer than working at it independently.
Yeah, and along those lines, because I spent a lot of time on our APIs, certainly the turn for Visa, because again, I've been at Visa 18 years, and there was a real product kind of mentality, which meant you built the whole stack, which, looking back on it historically, while it always felt good at the time because you could control the stack, it also meant we put a lot of risk into the business in terms of getting there faster, and in a world, in my mind, that's all about cycle times. Yeah. I'm curious how you think about kind of build yourself versus partner.
Yeah, I mean, we're 12 years old, and we clearly have had a mindset where probably we want to build it all, right? And when you get to a certain point of scale, and when you start to think about the opportunities in front of you and what you're solving for, you start to realize there's certain elements that actually you're not good at. And there's actually other people out there, such as yourself, in terms of some of the payment stack elements you bring to the equation, and obviously the sort of network element in terms of scale and global coverage. And really, as we look at about our acceleration path, you have to make those choices. And I think these are choices where, it's taken an element for us to take a step back and realize what, we can bring the core competency to the market for the benefit of the consumer around the UX and the risk capabilities and how we provide that point-of-sale consumer finance from a mobile-first point of view. And then the elements that Visa can help us from the payment stack element that, we either build ourselves or we outsource it.
Yeah. So I mentioned also how as an industry, I don't think we've, I think we've created an opportunity for you because we haven't behaved really well in terms of solving consumer merchant pain points. So just give me a sense from your discussions with your clients, your merchant clients in particular, and obviously the knock-on of the consumer, like how important is that to the merchant in terms of taking friction out of the experience, and where does payments really fit in their day in and day out operations?
I think actually the philosophy at Klarna is really one that we're not trying to solve payments. We're trying to solve buying. And really we've spent sort of the last 12 years really trying to split the buying and the payment component. Because, there's other speakers here as well as our own data sources. We've clearly proven that at the end of the day, you're trying to create the conversion. And the more friction points you put in, the less conversion you create, whether that's online or offline. And so really, we're really focused in really sort of maniacally solving that UX experience and really trying to make sure it is a one-click. And thankfully and successfully over the last 12 years, we've continued to prove that for our merchant partners.
Yeah, so also along those lines, because I know there's a lot of discussion about loyalty and offers and the battle for the point of sale effectively, where I think a lot of folks think the magic is doing that right there at the point of sale. I mean, again, back to the friction point, how do you guys think about it kind of pre-post versus in
I
the
frame
flow?
it, to me, sometimes we see the interjection of loyalty programs, points, cashback, coupons, offers, gift cards. All of those are obviously retention plays. But, I think at the end of the day, the consumer is speaking with their own behavior, and really the customer experience is the new loyalty, right? You don't have to look at beyond payments and other things like Uber is a good example where, you've just removed payment in its entirety. And really just the customer wants a simple user element and maybe doesn't want all the other noise that comes with it.
Yeah. So last question for you. There are a lot of folks, I think a lot of the value of this conference is the business development that happens in the hallways and in conference rooms and at tables and at the hotel room. So when you think about partnership, again, back to what you just did with us in terms of the investment and what you're looking for, what advice do you give to folks? How do you with Klarna think about partnerships and how should folks think about partnering, whether it be at like a API level or at a kind of a commercial level?
I'd actually probably be the first to say, I think, I'm not sure Klarna has probably been the best advocate for partnerships through its journey and its life cycle. But as we have really started to build beyond our geographic boundaries and look at how we do that, partnerships have ultimately become at the core of what we're trying to do. And what are partnerships? It's really, I suppose, taking the things that you're good at and finding the things, recognizing the things you're not good at and finding the complementary asset, right? Is it a bit like Ronaldo and Real Madrid or Belichick and Tom Brady? To an extent, sometimes the obvious partnerships are not the ones that people can always predict. But ultimately, what we're looking to always do is really find those that both also see the customer in the same way we see it. And I think that's quite important. And certainly in our discussions, what became quite evident is we had a same shared view of what we wanted for the end customer. And I think that's the most important starting point. Then as long as you share that, I'm sure we can solve the rest. Right? And there will be good friction, but that's also healthy in a partnership.
Yeah, no, I agree. And we're really looking forward to the partnership, and thanks for kicking it off here with me today. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Jim. I'm looking forward to it as well.
Thanks, everybody.